Hello, Penny. How are you today?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing, Dan?
Well, I'm good. And we were just discussing, this is being recorded on Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day to both yourself and to everyone else out there that is celebrating and being romantic.
Happy Valentine's.
Got a lot to cover. We're going to get on and talk about more specifically the Clean and Tidy Home Show in a few minutes. But what I like to do, and is, I guess, typically the case for these things, is sort of bring yourself to life and, I guess, your journey up to when you decided to start your own thing. Because when I speak to lots of people, they say to me they sort of fell into events. But actually, having looked at your background, you did a degree in events management at Leeds University. So interested to know, did you always think you wanted to be within events, having made that decision to do a degree around it?
No, not at all. So I went to a school where you were very much encouraged, if not told, that you must apply to Red Brick University and do an academic degree. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. So they just said to me, choose your favourite subject. And so I was set to study Italian at Leeds University. And suddenly then thought, what the hell am I going to do with a degree in Italian afterwards, and still felt like I needed some direction. And I just started looking at some business management degrees and just happened to come across events. And I thought, oh, everything it was saying, are you like this or do you like that? I thought, yeah, that sounds like a bit of me, actually. And so at that point, I then shifted to Leeds Metropolitan, as it was called at that time. It's now Leeds University, and didn't tell my school at all that I was doing the move. So I think they probably still think I did Italian at Leeds Uni. But it was a great course. And it was a sandwich degree. So I actually did my placement at Olympia Exhibition Centre, which was one of the magical times of my life. And actually Jill, who's now halls director there, she was my boss in the conference centre back then. And she did the introduction to my first organising role at Closer Still Media once I graduated. So I've got a lot to thank that degree in the sandwich course for.
Okay, so interesting. So you weren't going to do events, you were going to do Italian, but then you chose to do events. And again, I guess sometimes when people do a degree, you know, I've spoken to people that did a law degree and thought, I'm never going to become a lawyer because it actually turned me off the topic. But in your instance, doing the events degree put you on that treadmill and you were excited to develop a career within it. So tell me what happened sort of after university. How did you go about finding a role within the event space?
So I literally had a call from Jill, who was my manager at Olympia, and said, oh, Closer Still Media are looking for an ops executive. What do you think? And it just seemed like a great opportunity, literally based just over the road from Olympia as well. So it was familiar to me, and a part of London that I knew and loved. And I literally started there straight after graduating. And I was at that point only the second hire in the operations team. So my manager, Julia Dan Mary, who's still a really good friend of mine, was the first hire and me the second in the operations team. So that was a really interesting time to be joining a really growing company. And we were all in one office then, and I don't even know how many they have now, but it's certainly many. And so that was my first introduction really to B2B exhibitions from an organizer perspective. But I was always kind of putting my nose in different areas and wanted to know a little bit more. And I think after such growth Closer Still in those kind of early days, was really hungry for more. And it was almost like my role was plateauing a little bit. And I could see that the commercial teams and some of the marketing teams kind of had more of a career trajectory, which I was struggling a little bit to work out where I would go. And so I actually went to Next work for what was then Event Shaper, or became Event Shaper, and worked across a whole host of different events, both B2B and B2C, for organisers such as Clarion, Media 10, Brand Events, as well as a load of other independents, and working with some really inspiring founders. Which again, I think just really gave me the appetite for getting involved in more than just the operations side of things.
Yeah, and Event Shaper is Lou Kiwanuka, is that right?
Yes,
yeah, Lou, who obviously is now set up the fantastic Ops Nest.
Yes,
so interesting because
done really well there, because speaking as somebody with an events degree, there in terms of that practical knowledge, it's just not something that's covered, certainly even at degree level. So I think it's a really, really great opportunity for people to learn that way.
Absolutely. So you came at it from an ops background, because I was always within events and trade shows, sort of the commercial element. And I think you're right. I guess the commercial teams, then the marketing teams, and maybe the ops teams. When you looked at senior management, when you looked at people that left to set up their own businesses, in the main, it was from the commercial side of things, right? I guess so. People that sort of drove the revenues and maybe had more of an appreciation. So it's interesting that actually I'm speaking to someone that had more of an operational background that then decided, I guess, quite early doors that she's going to have to get a more wide-ranging view and experience of the industry. Yeah. Talk to me about sort of ops and where you think that sort of fits in terms of, the sort of challenges that people maybe have within that role to get more wide-ranging experience.
Yeah, I think not just in the events industry, but I think we're always conscious to pigeonhole people into certain skill sets, and titles are incredibly important, and they certainly were to me early on in my career. And that's how we reflect on how well we're doing and climbing that career ladder, if you like. And I think what's been so fascinating about starting my own business and starting to build a team of freelancers and stakeholders and otherwise is that actually to be able to do different things is really important, because you see the wider mix. And so I think operations was an amazing grounding, but for me to be able to tell an exhibitor or sponsor that to have their floor tiles by the toilets, as I remember a conversation having a close to even in the early days, and how much footfall they're going to get, because do you know how many people go to the toilet when they're at a stage show, and to kind of see things from a different side. And I think certainly in terms of account management now, I'm able to answer questions that typically the sales team might need to redirect to an operations team and wait a while to go back, or you'd wait until that handover further down the line, 3 months out of the event or otherwise. So I think certainly that kind of account management has really been an interesting angle. But I think there's a lot to do in the industry in terms of seeing that career trajectory from an operations perspective, and certainly other specialisms as well. And I think we just need to be more open-minded that people can move, because I certainly had to really orchestrate a way to do that without having to take a step back, which is what a lot of people told me initially. It's actually through a mentoring program called Fast Forward 15, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but run by a lady called Faye Sharp, who's brilliant. And I was a mentee, and Tracy Halliwell from London and Partners was my mentor, who was brilliant. And it was really great to see a slightly different perspective rather than just the kind of exhibition centric, if you like. And that was what then led me to my next role at Informa. And where I was responsible there for operations, yes, but also some other projects that were going on that really opened my eyes. And that was where I joined a team and was responsible for an acquisition and integration of an event into the business. And I think that's really where I certainly learned a lot more about the commercial aspects.
Sure. So there's a lesson there, right? I mean, it is easy to get on a treadmill and just stick with something that you're doing, but actually takes guts and an intention, an intentional decision to think, actually, I need to move to maybe sort of broaden my horizons and see what I want to do. I want to get towards present day, and I'm interested to understand where the decision came for you to launch. I guess, firstly, we'll come to the actual show in a minute, but to be your own boss and to go into the big wide world of running your own business. Tell me about was that something that even, coming out of university or after your first job, you sort of always thought you wanted to do? Just talk to me about that sort of thinking in the process.
Never. I never thought that I wanted to run my own business. I always remember watching films where there'd be kind of the big CEO who'd have to leave a birthday party because there was something crazy going on at work. And I always thought, I really want to be that good. I want to be that important. Really strange thing to kind of think of, especially when we come on to talk about work-life balance and those things now. But I'd never seen me setting up my own business. Always was inspired when I saw founders that did the same, and always thought, well, they've obviously got something that I haven't got, and that's just not for me. But just through a series of events over about 3 years, having children, redundancy, COVID, and various other things, just kind of, we talk about people falling into events. I almost feel like I fell into this in a way, but it got to the point where the idea that I had for the show, which we'll come on to, almost just drove me, and it just became this really annoying idea that I just had to do something with. And actually that was what drove me, rather than the need or want to work for myself.
So yeah, interesting, because sometimes it happens by circumstance. You move on from a role, you then have to think about an idea that you want to do, and so you're sort of thrown into it. Other times it is an intentional decision to do that. Obviously, it happened at an interesting time for individuals and for the event space. So around back end of 2020, beginning of 21. Yes. Some might say interesting decision to think about launching an events business. I think it was the second or third lockdown, beginning of 21. Talk to me about that, the thinking about that. And obviously, I know, if I'm not mistaken, you had a young family, or you might have been pregnant at the time, or you just had a child.
Yes. So the idea for the show I kind of had fleetingly a few years ago, but was, as I say, never really had the drive to work for myself, and just thought, that'd be a really good event for someone else to run when they think of it. And I had my second son on the 6th of January 2021, and by the 29th of January, coincidentally my birthday, I decided, right, let's go for this. And that's when I founded Latch Events, with a view to running the event the following year. And there are so many amazing people that have supported me through this process. But I remember showing my business plan to the likes of Mike Seaman and talking to him about running the event the following spring. And I remember him, amongst others, just saying, do you really want to give yourself that shorter runway? Do you want to give yourself a bit more time? And I was thinking, but spring could be really, really good. And I kind of was a bit impatient. I wanted to do something with this idea. But through consulting and getting advice from different people, went for the October. And thank goodness I did. Otherwise, it would have been an amazing struggle. I mean, we were faced with different things that impacted the campaign, and train strikes as it happened in the October. No, thank goodness that I gave myself a little bit longer to get it out of the door, so to speak.
And it's obviously, we can take advice from lots of people, lots of experienced people, but ultimately, when you're running your own business, the decision obviously has to rest with yourself. Talk to me about the type of event it is. So it's called the Clean and Tidy Home Show. How did you come up with the idea? What sort of sparked your interest? Did you have a vision from day one of how you wanted it to be delivered? Give us a view of what inspired you to launch a show within this market.
So some people may be familiar with a lady called Mrs. Hinch, who has risen to fame on Instagram, and she's now got her own home ranges and doing some amazing work with various different brands. And a friend of mine just recommended I follow her because she had this amazing hack that you can do with a toilet roll, where you can fold it and then press it underneath a tap, and it looks all lovely, like it's got a little stamp as if you're at a hotel. So that was the first reel or photo shared with me. And I thought, this is interesting. And I just thought, my goodness, if somebody's got her life that well together, then I've got a hell of a lot to learn. And all that I remember thinking was, wow, there's a lot of people that are really interested in this, and then there must be an opportunity there to bring them together, or some kind of, events opportunity. And that's literally all it was, just this kind of fleeting thoughts. But it wasn't until going into lockdown and losing control of my home where I really started to think, hold on, there's something more to this. So like so many people, my dining room became a playroom, an office. When we first went into lockdown, my son was 6 months old, so I was starting to wean him. I was working full-time, parenting full-time, and I'd never been in my home so much. I'd never eaten so many meals at home. I was used to going on site for 3 weeks at a time, and home was just where I kind of kept my stuff. It wasn't where I really lived. So that adjustment to motherhood and then lockdown, I think, was quite intense. And my home changed a lot in such a short period of time, again, like it did for so many. Sure. But I think it was really becoming a mum where I started using social media, and specifically Instagram, as more of a source of information. And I think going through that time at home, and obviously there were lots of people that were turning to social media at that time, I realized not only is there information and brand recommendations and tips and tricks, but actually a whole community that's really supporting each other and saying, you know, you can really find people that are like you and going through the same struggles. And that's the point at which I just started to think more about it as more of a community meetup rather than just a fan base or, you know, that kind of clear buy sell side in terms of kind of cleaning products. But it wasn't really until my second son was born that I really started pulling together the business plan and the kind of stakeholder mix. So while I'd be awake at night with him, instead of trying to keep myself awake with biscuits and Great British Bake Off, I was scrolling Instagram and Googling and writing my business plan and discovering amazing associations. And someone mentioned the Association of Professional Declutterers and Organisers, who've been around for a long time, and they've got membership. Amazing. British Institute of Cleaning Science. And I think what's just becoming clear is there was quite a bit of a gap in education, certainly in terms of my expectations as a housemate, a wife, a mum, and a homeowner in terms of how I should keep my home. And I just never really thought about it enough. So really, that's the point at which I was like, right, there must be people out there that need the same support that I do.
Sure. So it's not an unfamiliar story where people set up, they're either selling a product or a service or launching a show where it's come off the back of something that's meant something to them and that they've experienced. So they've got their own problem, if you like, and they think they're going to come up with a solution that other people can use and obviously interact with each other, and as you said, within a community. I like this sort of show to be educational. Someone sitting here now, you might say, God forbid, thinking about launching a show. What are the sort of, I'm not going to say 4 or 5 things, but what are the main things that you looked at? Because you said you were sitting up at night looking at things, associations, coming up with a business plan. What sort of things do you have to do first when you're looking to launch a new event in a market, would you say?
So certainly understanding the buy sell mix, you know, who needs to get what out of it. So I knew that independently I had a community that wanted to get together and meet up. So if nothing else, even if the products weren't into that, I could have hosted a meetup for the community. But in terms of that wider stakeholder mix, really understanding, you know, what are brands already doing in that space? And the majority of our exhibitors had never exhibited at a show before. So really to understand what they're already doing and how you can coincide with that, or certainly, you know, change things up for them and deliver on their objectives. So really just by talking and, more importantly, listening to people and what they're doing, and quite early on building that group of supporters. So I mentioned associations that we're working with, really understanding how we can kind of work together and those other kind of community groups and bringing them together. It's really interesting because there's so many times where I'd given myself quite clear milestones for how much I should have brought in commercially, and all of those just kept kind of pushing back. And I'm incredibly risk averse. I'm not opposed to taking risks, but probably because of my operational background and health and safety influence and various other things, they would need to be really considered moves. And I don't know if it was because of my mental state at the time, or whether it was lockdown or all those barriers that had existed before that period of my life, that it probably made me a little bit more agile in my thinking. And also, as I say, because the idea was driving me so much, it was almost a case of let's just kind of give this a bit longer. And that almost gave me some more momentum that otherwise I'd have probably kind of suppressed the risk. So I think it's understanding, certainly in my part, the emotion around that, and really when to kind of keep pushing on, when to react, when to shift what you're doing, I think was quite important.
Because I guess you're driven by emotion to do something to start off with, but you need to be emotionless when you're listening to the market.
Yeah.
Because I guess the market say, look, this is not going to fly. We're not going to support you. You know, I guess the history of business is littered with people that have come up with products and services they think is great, but not other people necessarily want. And they just carry on and carry on. So you launched the business in Jan 21. Talk to me about the moment where it was a point of no return, possibly when you signed the contract with the venue or whatever, that you knew, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Give me a timeline. Was it signing with the venue? What was like the sort of moment where you thought, you know, oh, I'm actually committed?
So I suppose there's probably two versions of this. First, yes, with the venue, because I think that was really where I was committing. But again, in terms of the calculation of risk, I knew what that kind of meant to me and how I could facilitate that. To a certain extent, 9 o'clock on the opening morning was probably where I really thought this is actually happening. And, you know, without trying to be dramatic in any way, but the Queen passed 3 weeks before our show. So that impacts the campaign so badly in terms of the traction we were getting for ticket sales and things like that. We then had train strikes over the weekend, so it felt like constantly, and that's just, you know, a couple of examples, there were these kind of wins and challenges that were a constant battle, and, you know, there were some hairy moments, but we just, you know, kept going and having faith, and which as I said, didn't necessarily come naturally at all times. But yeah, I really think it was actually standing there on opening morning where it probably hit me a little bit, and so much to the point that I think a few people worried me about me after the show, because I just kind of went dark, because I just was in a shell shock that it had kind of happened, and thought, right, really done this now. Yeah. This, are we going to do it again? You know, and so yeah.
So how do you deal with those emotions? You know, you've got a young family, you're married, you've put, I guess, a certain amount of financial risk, you know, you've backed it to a certain extent as well. How do you deal with that? How do you emotionally, you know, I guess there were moments where you doubt yourself. Doesn't matter how many times people are telling you it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine. They're not the ones that are putting their neck on the line. How do you deal with that?
Still learning, and every day is very different. I think I couldn't tell you an exact point, but I felt like there was a bit of a shift where instead of asking people what should I do and doing what they told me, which is where I think, you know, working in corporate companies or otherwise, you know, tends to be a case you've kind of got your parameters or otherwise and someone to ask for advice for. But I think there was kind of a shift where I would listen and say, okay, I like that bit about what you said, but that doesn't quite sit well with me, or I like what somebody else has said, or actually I've had this idea, and I would kind of bring that in. And so I think there was kind of a natural shift, and I think that then in some ways was more scary, but actually was, again, enabling in the way that it was right. I don't have to keep asking someone's opinion on what I should do next, because I kind of know, and they're there if I need them as such.
So it's confidence as well. Like once you've made a few right decisions, you know, you're on the right track, that actually I can do this. You know, this is
and I think just making decisions, I think that was probably the hardest thing for me, because I just don't think I'd realised how many decisions there were going to be to make. And as I say, I'm not a risk taker typically, so for me to have to kind of quantify every single decision, sometimes I did just have to go with my gut, rather than, you know, I didn't have days or hours to kind of waste. Once the dates were confirmed, it was a case of we've just got to kind of run with this. So sometimes I think it was really just trying to trust myself, which, as I say, still working on.
And I know in our pre-chat you spoke about the support of individuals and that you knew before, and that support, I guess, can come in many ways. I'm interested to know what that meant to you, whether that's just someone lending an ear, listening to you, or actually, you know, providing a service. Talk to me about the sort of support that you receive from people that I guess you'd worked with in the industry before. Just sort of bring that to life, because I'm keen to sort of understand how that works.
So much. I'm going to forget or not have time to mention everybody that supported me. But just to give you some examples, there were people, friends of mine from the industry, that paid for their own hotel to come and work for free, bringing their husband too. There were people like my brothers, my sisters, that were either there manning the help desk with their other halves or looking after my children, where my mum and dad also got involved. So many people that came and lended their time, whether it was managing the main stage or so. There was just so many people in the run up, in terms of, as you say, lending an ear or physically being there, even just to give me a call at a certain point saying, been there, how are you? I remember saying, okay, so it's got to the point where I'm waking up with sweats at night. Did you ever have this? Yeah. Also, you're at that stage. Yeah. You are, so just even that kind of emotional support was just brilliant.
Yeah.
And I've spoken a few times with some of the people that have supported on the show about this currency of kindness, and we're even moving it forward now, so that actually continuing to work together in a way that I can support them on their business, they can support me on my business. And I just think that's so lovely. And I think that's almost the ethos of the Clean and Tidy Home Show, really, that it's just people supporting each other in this kind of shared need, which I think is really beautiful.
And so then coming on to the show itself, so obviously the first edition was in October 22, so 4 or 5 months ago now. For those that didn't go, wanted to go, don't know too much about it, sort of bring it to life. So if I'm a visitor, what do they do there? What do they hope to get out of it?
So if nothing else, I suppose it depends how kind of Instagram centric you are. So to some people, the term cleanfluencer might mean something, but certainly cleanfluencer, so cleaning influencer on Instagram. I would say our core audience are cleanfluencers from Instagram. So there are a lot of people that will follow these content creators and perhaps be messaging each other for years before having the opportunity to meet. And so we brought that community together. So you could literally see people running up the aisles to hug and meet each other, perhaps for the first time in the flesh after a number of years, which was really, really beautiful. But there is the opportunity to shop and demo and sample various different cleaning products, as well as organisational products. So we had the likes of the label lady there, who makes labels that you can put on your pasta jars if you're decanting and getting organised in that capacity. We had different stages. So the main stage features the likes of Lindsay, Queen of Clean. Marie Kondo we had a video of her, a video address, and her consultants that were there, but her brand KonMari was one of our major partners, which was really lovely to see. We had a demo stage where we had the folding lady doing various different folding techniques, as well as upcyclers and various others. We had a help desk, which was front and center as you came in, which is what one of my sisters and her other half managed. So we really introduced them, rather than just having hostesses that weren't known to the community. We introduced them and said, come and speak to my sister Lottie if you need anything at the show. As well as things like a community hub, where people could have connect and chat sessions and just really engage with the wider community. And my brief was kind of like, I wanted it to feel like a warm hug, and getting some feedback from various different stakeholders. They said that's exactly how it felt. And actually even brands were collaborating, meeting and since have been doing work together, as well as just the general person coming with a challenge around paperwork, perhaps, which was really lovely to see.
Cool. Fantastic. And consumer shows, different beast to obviously trade shows. Having worked on both sides of the fence, I would suggest, in my personal experience, possibly harder to mobilise an audience to, and they're definitely more opinionated. The great British public, they know what they want, they know what they don't like. Talk to me about the process. You've already mentioned cleanfluencers and influencers generally. talk again, if someone's listening, in terms of mobilizing a community like this, consumer, to come to this type of show, give us some sort of tactics and some strategies that you employ to deliver the audience on site.
So we had a Shine squad of ambassadors.
Of course you did.
Who were incentivized to raise awareness about the show. If nothing else, they were a really familiar face for visitors. So 25% of our audience attended on their own, which for a consumer show is pretty bonkers. And so there's all that kind of specialist interest, if you like, which I know there are certainly some shows that are similar. But a third of our audience, their main objective to come to the show was to make friends. Yeah. So for us, it was really to have a community of people, or a committee of people that could essentially be that extended personality of the show, if you like, and welcome people in. So that worked really well. And I simply just slid into people's DMs and said, hi, this is what we're looking to do. And I think, you know, you could benefit from the added exposure to brands. Do you fancy supporting us? And had just a really, really great group of people doing that. And so we had 30 people last year. We then went out and said, does anyone else want to kind of get involved and help us? And we've had more than 100 people say that they want to join the Shine Squad, as well as the 30 that were last year want to remain with us. So we're just looking to expand the program. I've actually had about 20 calls already today with various people that are joining us. Yeah. And I think as we grow, that's really important. And making sure there's kind of representation and diversity across our visitor mix is really important. So certainly that kind of ambassador ship program. But also I think that piece around people coming on their own it was really important for us to convey what the experience was going to be like, that it's okay to come on your own. And we started a buddy program, which we're building on for this year. Okay. So that you know that anybody that wants to come feels like they can and they're going to be looked after. So I think that's really important.
Amazing. So it really is a community, and I guess you're asking them for suggestions and ideas of what the show should be about, because ultimately, I guess you're the organizer and you're hosting it, but really it's the community's show to a certain extent, right? You don't want to say this is my idea and it's got to be this. I guess they've probably persuaded you to do different things that maybe you visualized that you're doing in the first place, perhaps.
Absolutely. And I see myself as, you know, I am very much part of that community in the sense that I followed all of these people and would interact, but I was never somebody with a public Instagram account and doing the same things in terms of sharing my home. So I'm conscious that there are people like me that need to know that they can come to, and it's not just an Instagram centric event, which in this industry, there are a lot of brands that do smaller events where selected people are invited. So there can be a little bit of that kind of fear of missing out, but also that, you know, kind of them and us. And that's something that we really tried to break down, even when it came to the height of our stages and the setup. So that it wasn't a case of the speakers are there and we're here. Any of our speakers that were there would simply walk into the crowd and then be walking around. And even to the point that likes of Mrs. Hinch and Stacey Solomon attended as visitors. So it's very much a case of we are all in this together.
Yeah. And exhibitors, let's just talk about the sort of, because I guess if I'm not mistaken, I know there is a cover charge or a ticket price to get in, but I guess in the main, a good chunk of the revenues come from exhibitors and sponsors. In terms of encouraging new companies to give you their money to a new show, you know, you're Penny Moyses, okay, you've got a good background in events, but you haven't done your own a show before. You're just coming through a pandemic when, you know, I guess marketing managers, directors are a bit more discerning as to where they spend their money. So you've got a dual challenge there of convincing people that it's the right place for them to spend their money. How do you go about convincing a brand that you think will be perfect for the show to come on board?
Yes, you're right. It was tough. First and foremost, building those relationships. So I went into this not thinking necessarily that it's a numbers game and some are going to be in and some are going to be out, but actually all of these people or brands that I would want to be there, I need to really understand what they're looking to achieve and what's kind of next for them and how we might fit into that in the future, even if it's not now. So it was always with the view of building those relationships before anything else. But I think the power of influencer marketing and how influencer marketing has kind of grown and shifted over the last few years, I think certainly was for a lot of brands what really attracted them to the proposition. So understanding which brands work with which influencers and how that all plays out, but also some of the emerging brands' frustrations or challenges when it comes to working with influencers was an interesting one. So I certainly think that helped. So our Shine Squad supporting us was invaluable in that sense. But I also think because the brands often run their own individual events, to understand that brands could get involved, and this is essentially something that we're facilitating, was another great opportunity.
Sure.
And to say that you don't need to select your audience, like, in terms of your budget restraints or whether it's your, capacity restraints or otherwise, but to say that we're going to do that for you. And I think one of the most powerful conversations that I had with one of the major brands was, it's so interesting that you're doing this because I've thought that we should do something like this. But as a brand, we can't be impartial in that sense.
Sure.
And so actually, I think it was something that was really a need across the industry. And so it was probably just pretty good timing. And a lot of people saying, I'm pleased that you're doing this and you're taking this headache and we can just join you. So I think that was pretty good.
And does the community sort of live on between the shows? So, I'm working on the assumption it's not just a show and we'll see you next year. There's lots of sort of touch points across the year in between the shows. Just talk to us briefly about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are very much engaged in content throughout the year, and we're just facilitating some different online meetups. We certainly are going to be doing a lot with our Shine Squad of ambassadors, but also expanding that to visitors too. But we're also working on some regionalised meetups, and that's something that we really hope to expand on moving forwards. It's really important that everybody feels included. And so for us, a case of just being in London once a year, we want to make sure that we're going out to people too, and also making as much of the content available online as well for those people that for whatever reason can't travel. So that's really important.
Fantastic. Okay. And just finally, in terms of the future, so you've got another show, the second edition, coming up this October.
Yep, October 14th, 15th.
Excellent. And tell us about maybe some of the learnings you said from the first show, things that you want to be doing this time around. Tell us about the exciting developments for the next edition of the show.
Sure. So we've got a new feature called the Extra Stage. And I've literally just come off an Instagram Live actually talking about it. And it's really about having the confidence to be your authentic self and your home and lifestyle, essentially helping to enable that and honouring that, which we're really, really excited about. I think in terms of learnings, I think we've learned that there are so many people that need the support just like I've needed it or others have mentioned. So I think that lifestyle piece and facilitating people's being confident within this space to know what's available to them and what shifts they can make in their homes and their lifestyles is really important. I think we can always do more from an inclusion perspective. So we're actually building a welcome committee, which I'm really excited about. It's not your typical tick box in terms of diversity inclusion, but really about really clean and tidy home show centric and how we can make sure everybody feels welcome. And I don't think that we can communicate enough the access to the show, what things we're doing. Excel's a great venue, but for the show last year, there were 2 mobility scooters, and that just simply wasn't enough for our show, let alone the other shows that are going on at the same time. So it's all different things like that we can do, as well as managing people's anxiety in the run up to an event, and certainly people that struggle perhaps to be in larger audiences or in noisy spaces. But what was the most interesting, which I'm sure some of the listeners will relate to, is that feeling of the event been and gone, and that almost feeling of loss post-event is something that we're going to be managing with our audience as well, because so many people had the best time over the weekend, but as we know, events are cyclical, and then it comes to an end, and you're almost like, what do I do with ourselves? So we're actually looking at a bit of aftercare as well, which is certainly in the last event.
Yeah, which is why I asked about the sort of ongoing community engagement as well. So, but that's an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about, that especially if you've maybe come there by yourself as well, and you're sort of within the community, and it'd be good for them to continue to build those relationships. And then if people want to get tickets or just find out more information, what's the best way for them to do that?
Go to cleanandtidyhomeshow.com, or by all means check us out on social media. Instagram handle is Clean and Tidy Home Show. We'd love to see you there.
Penny Moyses, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you're busy setting up all your different initiatives for the next edition of the show in October. Really fascinating conversation, and I'm sure it definitely will inspire people that are in a similar position. Maybe they're thinking about taking the leap, doing something different, launching their own show. What would you say to them? Give me a final message.
I would say two things. Accept help when it's offered. I'm still working on that. Really challenging. But also speak to me. I've got so many things to do to pay it forward in terms of the support that's been given to me. So I'm happy to give my time to anybody who asks for it, essentially.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for your time today, Penny.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.